Hey, welcome into another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And I do want to remind everyone up front, I've not mentioned this in a couple of episodes, that we are winding down this podcast to episode 150, where we're going to take a pause. We don't know how long the pause is going to be, but it's a very intentional pause so that Gary and I, rather than getting together to record, we're going to get together to write so that we are intentional about pursuing the goal of writing the book. And so just wanted to remind everybody that we are in the last few episodes here of the podcast.
And hence the subject for today.
Indeed, which is necessary endings.
Mm.
And I'm going to admit right up front that I took that title in its fullness from Dr. Henry Cloud. There was a presentation that I heard of his many, many years ago that was pretty eye-opening, and it was a game changer for me professionally. And I thought just that concept, though, of necessary endings was a great one for us to jump into as we are winding down the calendar year. 2024 is going to come to an end. A lot of us have transitions ahead. What does it look like? What does it mean when something that we've been involved in has to come to an end?
Now we have the choice on endings on some things, and other things we don't.
True.
We none of us has the choice of the year 2024 coming to an end.
Right.
It's going to.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I'm already preparing my goals and my wants and my what I want to try to accomplish in 2025. And my wife and I will be on a very long plane ride to Brazil soon, and we plan to spend that time going over that and rethinking and resetting and all that kind of stuff. And so, as a necessary end comes, often it opens up a new door, a new opportunity to rethink, reevaluate
Yeah.
going forward. Other things, though, we do have the choice of. We have the choice of certain relationships that we have in our lives. We have and some of those from family off to the person we buy a car from. You're right. There's
Hmm.
levels of that choice, but we always have a choice on relationships and how much we put into those and how much we foster them, and if we bring some to an end.
Yeah.
We have that in organizations that we belong to.
Yeah.
We have that in organization to organization. If we're influential in one organization that chooses to or not to stay involved in another organization.
Hmm.
So there's many different types of necessary endings, and I
Absolutely.
think that the definition of necessary could be discussed. Is it necessary to end?
Yeah.
I think sometimes we think about relationships and we think I sometimes believe, and this could be off base and lovely to discuss it, but that sometimes it's too easy to end relationships these days, and maybe some part of the relationship is working through some things, and maybe that so it shouldn't end, and so, but anyway, lots of reasons for necessary endings. Sometimes we drift into them. Sometimes we're very matter of fact and intentional about them, but they are happening with us in our lives all the time.
Absolutely. I think that question, though, that you posed is a fantastic first place to start. And that's, is an ending necessary?
Mm.
Whether that be, interpersonal, in a business setting, discontinuing a behavior, a habit, a something, is an ending necessary? And I can remember back to a period of time where this particular conference that I mentioned with this presentation by Dr. Henry Cloud was so impactful for me. And I wrote about it at the time. And I remember I was looking for some graphics to just have a picture associated with an article, right? And so I think I did some just generic looking up about endings or changes or things like that. And it came back with a lot of different images around the changing of seasons. So one particular tree in bud in spring, in full leaf in summer, in bright color and fading leaves in the fall, and then finally bare in the winter. And I remember looking at that picture and having that really make an impact on me and thinking about the ending of a cycle. And we live in New Mexico where we have distinct seasons, which
Hmm.
a lot of people are surprised by. New Mexico is a desert, but it's high desert. So we do have cold temperatures in the winter, including freezing temperatures. And so we do have an end to seasons here in New Mexico. And I remember commenting to somebody that I'm really thankful we do, because if we had eternal summer, our cockroaches would be the size of Florida's and I would not live here anymore. Right? I mean, there are positives to things coming to an end. When temperatures dip, when we have freezing weather and it kills out bugs or diminishes populations of species or whatever it does, there are necessary cycle shifts for the ecosystem, right? So, I mean, we can even start with that.
Sure. And, when you're in the dead of winter, and, there's various pros and cons for every season, of course, depending on what you like and don't like and what your comfort levels are. But, in order to have spring, you must have winter.
Yeah.
And I think you could think about that in most cycles in life. Oftentimes, one cycle or one part of a cycle is necessary for the other cycle to even commence. And so some endings are necessary in that there's no beginning without the ending.
Yeah. And somebody might argue, yeah, what about Florida? What about the Hawaiian Islands? They have bugs that I would not tolerate. So I'll just leave it with that.
Well, and my wife's from Fortaleza, Brazil, which is very near the equator,
Yeah.
and you talk about an endless summer. I mean, their winter is 2 weeks of rain, right? But it's the same temperature, right? And so they don't have seasons, and I think oh, how sad, right? Coming from a place that does have seasons, but they don't think anything of it, right? And so context is important too.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes an ending may be necessary for one person, but not for another.
Good point. Yeah, so maybe that's the next one on the line is, is this ending something necessary for me and others involved or just for myself? Because
Mhm.
maybe you need to remove yourself from a situation where others are going to carry on.
We hear a lot about that lately, of people who are saying, "I am ending a relationship based on how someone voted," or "I'm not going to go to my family gathering because those folks voted differently than I," or something. Which look, family's family. You know my opinion on that. We've talked about that before, but if just because it's an ending for you doesn't mean it's an ending for everybody else around you, and that has to be an individual's choice. And yes, sometimes things have to end for others to begin. Elementary school has to end for middle school to begin.
Certainly.
Winter has to end for spring to commence, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes those endings are choices.
Mhm.
And when do we think we need to intentionally have a necessary ending in our life with respect to a relationship, an organization,
Yeah.
or an event?
Yeah. Sometimes making those decisions, though, impact a much greater network of people than just yourself, depending on the position that you hold. And so I'm thinking back to a time when I had to end an organization. We were upside down financially, though we were doing amazing things in the community and we had such great successes in so many regards, we could not afford to keep the doors open. And so I had to make a really hard choice that devastated me, but also the employees that I had under me and all of the volunteers and ultimately all of the clients that we served. But we had fought tooth and nail to keep this organization afloat. We couldn't do it. We were becoming very quickly into a position where we were going to be owing everybody we know money, and there was no escape route. And so the decision was made, but boy, did it make a major impact.
That's right. And so you can have a necessary ending that your decision as one person makes that has a ripple effect on many people.
Yes.
And I had a similar situation where back in the irrational exuberance of the late 90s, when I went out to raise money for a startup and we were oversubscribed and the money just thrown at us, and then the expectation was grow as fast as you possibly can, and we grew into a 250 person 5 building organization in 18 20 months.
Mm.
And then the 9/11 hit, and people stopped needing erbium doped amplifiers because they figured out multiplexing and multiple colors down fibers, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the point is the environment and the situation changed, and we had to disband just as you did, and it was painful.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the end of that, boy, I'm never going to grow an organization that fast again without the commensurate milestones and purchase orders and things that would sustain. It was funny because right at that time, I had traveled to Norway to talk to a cousin, and I was talking to a cousin. Norway is where there's a town in Norway called Opedal. We were there for a family reunion, and then I followed one of my cousins back to Oslo, and we were having a conversation about his company. And he was saying how much business he had. And I said, oh, well, then just go hire a bunch of people. And he says, well, in Norway, you can't lay people off. I mean, you can. You could tell them not to come to work, but you still have to pay them.
Interesting.
And it's like, whoa, okay, that's a different perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe I wouldn't grow quite as fast, but I was still, because I was in the middle of ramping this thing myself, I say, well, but you could still, ramp and just keep getting more business and just keep that thing expanding until he says, yeah, but you never know what's going to happen. There might be a downturn, and you people in Silicon Valley, you just think it's just going to go on forever, and you're printing money, and there may be another cycle. And I said, it's never going to happen.
Oh,
And of
gosh.
course, 6-8 months later,
Yeah.
here I am, right? And so there are obviously contextual reasons that can lead to necessary endings. And there are ways to proactively prevent ourselves from being in those situations.
Yeah.
And now, are we perfect? Do we have a crystal ball? No. Is there going to be economic cycles? Most assuredly. Right. And so I think, part of the planning is understanding the cyclical events of nature.
Yeah.
Whether that's economy, politics, whatever, the pendulum's going to go back and forth. And there are sine wave theories of life that say everything in life is a sine wave. You just have to figure out the period and the amplitude. Yeah. Right. And so if you're not planning on that, you may come into some unintentional necessary endings.
No, that's true. We've touched on a little bit about relationships and about employment situations, but I think it is important that we talk a little bit about when we have to remove ourselves from an unhealthy situation, whatever that is, and whatever the genesis of the unhealth is, whether it's employment or it's some sort of a, social thing that you've been part of for a long time. If you're getting to a stage where things are causing you a lot of grief and pain and unhealth in mind, body, or spirit, there likely is going to be that internal dialogue that you have to have of, is this the place for me anymore? Is this the space where I need to remain? And asking some really curious questions about that for your overall well-being.
No question. And, I think, what comes to mind when you're saying that is removing yourself from a potentially toxic situation, or a situation where there's some abuse, where there's some, some stress levels that are not sustainable. But, there's also the situation where you think, the old adage of, did you have 20 years of experience, or did you have the same year 20 times? Right? If you're looking for a growth path, if you're looking for, challenge and stimulation in an organization, in a relationship, in an organization, do you sometimes have to do some necessary endings of certain parts of that for your own health and happiness and growth? So it doesn't have to be. As a matter of fact, some would argue that if you're proactive, it shouldn't be a crisis that makes you do an ending. It should be self-reflection. It should be, what do I want?
Yeah.
And am I getting what I want in this situation, relationship, organization?
Yeah. I think some other curious questions to throw in the mix before you make that decision to sever ties really has to be, have I done all that I can do to rectify the situation, or to bring balance, to, help mitigate unrest, whatever your circumstance may be, have I done my part? Have I done my role? And I've been doing some reading by an author named Danny Silk talking about conflict resolution. And I really appreciated what he said. And I'm going to do a terrible job of paraphrasing this, but the heart of the matter, or the matter of the heart, perhaps, is really, can you articulate what your need is? Are you safe enough to express to someone else what that need is? And will that person listen and respond? That really is at the bottom of all conflicts that we're experiencing. And, you can ask yourself that in a professional setting, am I having my needs met in this job? And perhaps it's as simple as math. I'm making $800 a week and my expenses are $1,200 a week. I am not getting what I need, right? It might be really cut and dry, but it might be more emotionally involved. And, I don't feel like I'm being respected, or I don't feel like I'm being listened to. And I need to feel like I'm a voice of value in this organization, right? And so then you have to go through the steps to say, okay, have you done all that you can do to contribute to a potential solution, rather than just, washing your hands of it and saying, I'm done, I'm out?
Well, now you're getting into needs and wants also, right? I mean,
Yep. Factors in.
just because if your expenses are 1,200 and your salary is only 800, well, there's other ways to approach that, like cut your expenses, right? But and I understand what you're saying about needs. Also, am I reacting properly in the situation? Am I is there something about my approach that could be changed
Yeah.
in addition to that? But yes, if you're looking at what your wants and needs are and they're not being met in a certain situation, the curious question is, can I remain and fulfill my wants and my needs, or do I need to make a change?
Yeah. I think what I found myself really reflecting on in that chapter of the book was being able to articulate what your need is. Because so much of the time, conflict arises because we feel misunderstood, we feel whatever it is that we feel. But if we really scale back and try to get to the question of what is it that I need and can I articulate it, many of us cannot.
Mhm.
Maybe we don't know what we need because we're just reacting to a feeling and we don't even know where that feeling comes from. And so, all of these questions spur more questions, which I suppose is the purpose of this whole podcast, to continue down that curiosity spiral, to get to a point where you can land at a space and say, oh, this is what I'm reacting to. This is actually what my need is. Let's have conversation around this.
So you bring up a great point, and one of the things that I always recommend and don't do often enough myself, so I'm preaching to myself here, is writing down that need or that want or that desire at the top of the page, and then really analyzing that. Why do I think I need this?
Yeah.
Are there other approaches to get what I want in this
Yeah.
situation? Am I trying to get this thing from this organization where I should be getting it totally somewhere else?
Mm-hmm.
And why and where did my expectation for this need come from?
Yeah.
And who put that there?
Yeah.
Is that a self-generated expectation, or did someone tell me this is what it's going to be, and now there's a disconnect? And did that person mean what I think they meant in
Mm-hmm.
that intersection, right? In that
Yeah.
expectation. So there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
curious questions that we can ask with respect to that needs, wants, desires. And I think there's even some definitions in there that are interesting. But writing it down at the top of a page, and then just spending a little bit of time on, do I really need this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I get this somewhere else? And am I perceiving that this is the only way to get this? Is there other things I can do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I want to travel and spend all my time on family relationships, that means I need to have a job that has this, this, and this. Or is there another way to do
Mm-hmm.
that? Right? And so I think there's great wisdom or great opportunities for growth in the analysis of, or the questioning, the curiosity of, what are my needs? Can I
Mhm.
articulate them
Yeah.
properly? And I love what you said earlier. I don't want to gloss over this. Do I feel safe
Mm,
in expressing that need in this situation? I think that's a fascinating one because if you don't, boy, that's a whole nother issue, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's assume for a moment that we've all gone down our, mental checklist of asking the curious questions, and we've landed at a place where, all right, I've got an understanding of what I need, and it is clear that this environment cannot meet the need for whatever reason. And you've made the decision, it's time for an ending. I think my other point that I want to focus on before we run out of time is ending well. That is something that is really, really important to me. And how do we, let's say that we're the instigators of the end, how do we leave well? And how do we leave in a place where we are hopefully not causing harm in our wake?
Yeah, it's a good one, and I think that part of the analysis of what are my expectations around my needs and wants, and can they be met here, is a really good way to articulate that to other people in the organization. In other words, a way to not end well is just come in one day and say, "I'm out of here."
Yeah,
Well, why? You're not meeting my needs. Well, what were they?
yeah,
Right? Okay, so that's not going to help anyone, right?
sure.
And by the way, I guarantee the next position you have, you're going to end the same way, right? It's
Yeah.
well, I just say there's a high probability, and so I think in that analysis, there's a way to objectively say, "Hey, here's what I want.
Mhm.
Here's what the organization wants and needs. Is there a match? And if
Yeah.
there's not, well, then let's think about a transition here.
Mhm.
Let's do this. And I think that having objective, and I was going to say non-emotional. Look, people are passionate. I'm very passionate, very emotional about many things, even though I think almost exclusively with my left brain. But as long as you don't get in a situation where people are, angry and making decisions in a time not out of their values but out of their reactions,
Mhm.
then that's always a good thing, and you have the chance, much higher probability of ending well.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Well, we are going to have a necessary ending to this episode because of just the time factor and to honor everybody in their capacity to listen. But I think these are some really important questions that we all need to ask. And, perhaps you're walking through the mental exercise right now of evaluating your 2024, looking ahead to 2025. And maybe part of this is going to factor into some of your decisions about things that you may need to end participation in or contribution to whatever it might be. And I hope this really served as a catalyst for some good curious questions that you can ask yourself as you try to figure out, is it time to step away?
Is it time to step away? Is it time to end this thing that I'm doing? There's an app that just showed me all of my monthly subscriptions.
Oh,
Tell you what, that's a good thing to do, to sit down once a quarter and say, okay, here's all my monthly subscriptions. Do I really need
yeah,
17 streaming services?
Robin.
Should I really be giving money to all of
Mhm.
these organizations?
Yeah,
And I think that having an intentional evaluation of all of the details in your life and doing that on a periodic basis is a big deal, because we will drift towards
mm,
busyness and overcommitment of our resources and time if we're not careful, especially in the world that we live in today.
yeah, good point.
We're not on the prairie where survival means that we've got certain tasks we have to do every day,
Mhm.
and then we fall in bed at night by the way, when the sun goes down, because there's not enough light to stay up and do
Mhm.
other things, right?
Yeah, we're not in
and
that world.
we sleep, right? We're not in that world. We're in a world where if you let it, you will have 27 subscriptions to things on a monthly basis. You'll be volunteering for these organizations. You'll be doing this at work. You'll be
Yeah.
saying yes, yes, yes to everything. And part of the necessary endings is saying no to some things so
Yeah.
that you have margin in your life and create some peace.
Good point. I think that's a good way to close it up for today. So, Gary, thank you. As always, a very stimulating conversation. and we will jump into it next time. And of course, we welcome your feedback, your comments, curiositynotjudgment.com, or on the YouTube channel. You can also comment on Spotify, however you want to find us. Shoot us some of your thoughts, and we love to hear from you. So we'll see you again next week.
Take care.